Hi, intro students. I wanted to move on to a second part of Contextualizing Art, a lecture that I hope will kind of extend from part one before we start to get into, I think, some of the grit of some kind of historically important information. A lot of what we ended, I think, with and have been talking about in terms of reasons why you should, or if art is giving us good enough reason for us to care about it. This idea of why you should spend your time viewing art is a question that I'm personally curious in answering for myself, but also want you to consider how you answer that, because of how that, I think, informs what you believe or how you perceive art, and in this case also how you perceive artists and the assumptions you make about them. So what do artists do? Artists make stuff. It's a pretty large category. They put that stuff forward in the world as candidates for appreciation. That's something we've discussed and talked about now. There are places and sites where artists show their work. Sorry, you guys, my kids are so loud upstairs. Anyway, we house those things in art galleries, museums. These are exhibition spaces. These sites bring viewing public to a place where we view the work together. Although the internet obviously is expanding this relationship. What are museums and galleries? Generally, they're institutions that generate a platform for art to become legitimate, right? Legitimized by those institutions and the public that supports them. Think about how we talked about Tom Friedman and this idea of reputation, this earning a reputation, and that somehow validating his work. That's social, that's relational, okay? The better the reputation, the more likely people are to believe the work is showing in the gallery is reputable and therefore legitimate as art. So what other reasons exist for why artists make stuff? The same stuff that other spheres, and what motivates other spheres in our society's status, right? Power, money, generally speaking. Humans want to leave a legacy. Just sheer communication. Artists have questions they're asking and seek answers through the making of this art. They want to make sense of the world, so they make these things to help them make sense. This can often be philosophic, political. Art becomes a dialogue of sorts. And then this other idea of kind of maybe world building. Hold on real quick. Now my cats are fighting. Okay. Maybe this maybe exaggerated sense that they're adding value to the world. But let's get to some extreme examples for the sake of it. This is an example of an artist. I wouldn't say this is a very well-known artist. I don't think has maybe been that influential, but had a moment of being spotlit, and it was mainly because of the extreme nature of the work. This is an artist who, for an exhibit, you can go to some of these links, but she was in her pregnancy of 9 months pregnancy, and she decided to make the pregnancy an exhibit in a gallery. This is New York City, and kind of laid out and created the gallery space as if it were the beginnings of setting up the birth, and so there was a birthing room and preparation, preparatory items for giving a natural birth inside the gallery. And then she had people sign up for an email list, a text message list, so when she went into labor, she texted people and you could go to the gallery and watch her give birth. And so she was performing, in her opinion, birth. She was kind of trying to argue and think about there not being as much separation between art and life. And so she's kind of blurring those lines, like when is this giving birth and when is this an image of giving birth, maybe. Those are things that you might pull from the work. It gets a little ethical or questionable ethically after the fact, because then she decided that she was gonna have her child be a living work of art, and you could invest as if you were purchasing this child's development as a work of art. And she slowly was recording in that little button smiley face. There's actually a camera, and that camera was kind of slowly recording pictures of what the baby was seeing. So she called it Baby X, Raising Baby X. We can get into a debate about the ethics of this, and I think that's a good conversation to have. But this is this kind of extreme end of what artists might do. This is an artist named Gregory Schneider who made a proposal that you could go to. This is a German artist who in German art space had proposed that you could go watch someone on exhibit who was dying. And so here's a quote: "I want to show a person which dies a natural death or just died a natural death. My target is to show the beauty of death." The show didn't happen. The exhibition space backed out. There was a lot of pushback from the public, but you can see the line. And so some of what I'm pointing out here preemptively is getting into this conversation we'll have more of, where people are trying to delineate what's art and what's not, what's real, what isn't, right? Or what's a representation of something versus when it's the actual thing. Is there any collapse that can happen? So am I going to watch death, right? Or am I going to see a performance of death? And this is the artist, just an image of his work where this is a dummy here, so that's not actually a real person, but it's meant to make you think it is. So, moving beyond those extremes, though, there is a series of movements that happen in art, and often they're perpetuated by figures, artists who are in this discourse pushing these ideas and having ideological or theoretical ideas that shape what it is they're doing. And so those questions that they're asking and they're seeking answers for through the work, they often get either self-defined by a group of artists who are doing that, or by critics or historians who observe a trend or a pattern. So there's a set of movements and periods, and to show you that that's by no means a small occurrence. There's all these different, this is just, the 19th century into the 20th century, you just see over and over. So you see Cubism, you see Art Deco, Bauhaus, abstract illusionism, appropriation, transgressive art, ... It's just there. It's endless. But usually these movements are in dialogue with one another on some level. So I like to use this word discourse because it is academic, but it means that there are people who are relevant within that discourse who are pushing that discourse, and sometimes pushing against other discourses that are competing for, interpretations of things, ideas about certain subjects, and so on. So knowing the art history, the art periods, and the art movements is key to understanding and interpreting art, although that's a really big ask, right? Ask the question, what is the precedent and what is the art theory that a particular work is relying upon? Now, that to me sounds really heavy, and it sounds as though art is asking you to be an art historian in order to understand it, and that becomes a difficult debate. So, an example of a movement. The Realist movement was led by a French painter named Gustave Courbet. His work was a radical break from the style of the time, specifically Romanticism, which was a reaction to the socio-political movements of its time. So the paintings were often at that time, this French artist, right? So the painters and artists are supported by the state. They're often commissioned to work for the state and are in service of the state. So they would paint Napoleon, and Napoleon in a style of the Romantics, where he would be on a horse and be idealized and so on. And Courbet believed that art needed to represent the harshness of life, so this kind of reality, rather than the historic or false ideal notion of the world or nature. He did this by making large paintings that depicted peasants, the working class, or a funeral, all believed to be unworthy of painting and art at the time. So you get the Stonebreakers, or a funeral, and this is a real funeral, so he's depicting real people. So I think, without getting too deeply into this portion of this lecture, you can read through this. This is pretty dense, but it's also important for us to acknowledge this term culture and how we're going to define it. So the term culture, in what is known as the anthropological definition, refers to the whole way of life, meaning a broad range of activities geared toward classifying and communicating symbolically within a society. We're going to start thinking on those terms, although art hasn't always done this or incorporated this, but really thinking very broadly about what contributes to making culture. So every facet. So it's not just this top-down idea, like we were just saying, where this kind of state-sponsored art is pushed on us as a form of culture or something that defines our culture, but it's all of it, right? It's the magazines, the comic books, the video games, the movies, and That seems pretty obvious to us now, but this hasn't always been the case, and we kind of slip into these assumptions pretty easily. Okay. So I'll skip down through this. That's pretty dense, but I wanted to give a kind of last example here. I'd like you to watch this video because I think it's really wonderful. But this is the artist Robert Rauschenberg, and this is someone next week I want you to write a bit about this piece, because I think it's got something really interesting to tease out, and especially in terms of where we start to not only identify where the art happens or where it's existing in an artwork, either inside the artwork or the things around it, or both, but also this notion of where what does the material of an artwork have to do with its meaning? In other words, what is it made up of that helps us understand it? So let me explain. This is the artwork. It's called Erase de Kooning. Now, you'll notice that it's framed. It's got a little tag down here that gives the Erased de Kooning, Robert Rauschenberg, 1953, I believe. Is that correct? I'm forgetting at the moment, but I think it's something 53, 59. I'll look that up. It's not critical, though, for us right now. But de Kooning, let me escape here and go to Erased de Kooning so you can see. And here's the Erased de Kooning, created in 1953. I was right the first time, I think. But I want you to look at de Kooning. This is William de Kooning. And in the video, he kind of describes this, I think, pretty well. But what you're meant to see when you look at this image here is a de Kooning, because de Kooning, William de Kooning was a famous abstract expressionist. He's a famous painter who at the time was very idealized by a lot of young artists. He was kind of the pinnacle of success, and the painting itself is something you would recognize by that title at the time. So it's important to understand and know who William de Kooning is. And Rauschenberg is a young artist coming up at the time, and he asks de Kooning if he can have a painting, right, or a drawing or an image, and he would like to erase it. Okay, and so it gets a little deeper because Rauschenberg, and we'll talk again about Rauschenberg, but he's making these erasures as drawings. So he's drawing and then erasing, and he says in this video that he realized that he couldn't erase his own drawing because it needed to start out as art, and what he really means is it needs to be recognized as art, and that has a lot to do with influence and status and all those things we've been talking about. So he gets this drawing and erases it, and then frames it in this gold-leafed frame. Okay, and it sparks a pretty huge controversy. But some of the things you might think about, Duchamp, you might think about the ready-made, going back to Fountain, right, and the urinal that Duchamp put forward. But you also might start to think about what really is, where's the art happening, and does the material carry the meaning? And so when I look at this, the action is where the meaning is happening. So in the act of erasing, the act of soliciting the drawing from de Kooning, right, the action is performative. I'm meant to see that kind of erasure happening over time, but also I'm meant to see the erasure as a metaphor for how we might deal with being a young artist under the weight of William de Kooning, right? And so he contests that as a meaning, but I think this is one of those instances where the meaning isn't always in the control of the artist, right? So let's stop there, and I'll continue. Next Monday we'll have a new lecture, and I'll ask some questions around some of this lecture. All right?